Hi everyone, thank you very much for stopping by and returning to the Old World. Today let's talk about project plans. Now we've all been very keenly building, painting models, getting stuff onto the table as soon as we can, and starting to explore how the game plays out and whether it meets our expectations and also playing the way we thought it would. Are our predictions correct? And as we use this information that we're picking up along the way, we'll doubtlessly using this to refine our army lists, exploring what works well in our armies and what doesn't. And I think a key part of this is not only understanding the army that we're collecting, the force that we're building, but also to understand what our opponents are likely to look like. What is their army build going to be? For many of us, this means charting a long, difficult road, as we've probably only got a handful of games in by this time. The more serious players out there may well have quite a few more, but I don't think the internet's quite fully come alive with an agreement around what looks good, what the meta is looking like on a more global scale yet. Everyone still seems to be finding their feet. Now, I've had the opportunity now to face the Bretonnians a couple of times and came into this not with a tailored list, but sort of then having to adapt my tactics to what was on the field against me. And I know when facing Bretonnians, you're expecting to see lots of quick moving shock troops, knights piling through, plenty of access to flying creatures, be it Pegasus knights or characters on Pegasi or raw Pegasi, maybe even a hippogriff, backed up by at least one unit of peasant infantry. And going into these games, I had an idea in my mind as what is the Bretonnian core strength? Well, it's their ability to get quick moving shock troops into your ranks very quickly. The Bretonnian warhorse having that extra notch of speed over a normal human horse, especially when it's got a Grail Knight on the top that could be virtued up and magical itemed up to the gills. That's a pretty scary proposition. And yes, that is a massive strength of Bretonnia, is the speed in which it can come at you and can disrupt your ranks. However, I don't think that is the Bretonnian super strength and the thing we really need to watch out for when playing against them. At least this is anyway my takeaway from the initial engagements that I've had. I think currently that the Bretonnian super strength lies in real estate. What do I mean by this? Well, we've had a lot of conversation around things like line hammer over the last couple of weeks, where it's really advantageous for units to go wide, particularly if they've got things like great weapons, stuff like that. Getting lots of attacks back is more valuable, it seems, than having lots of ranks, particularly if you've got reasonably durable infantry. So the counter to that is, of course, you can get a couple of units in to charge that big, long line of troops, rendering it a lot less effective than you'd like before things like terrain and stuff are taken into account. And this, I think, is something Bretonnia is really good at. Units, they're not 5 wide. You're seeing things creeping a little bit bigger, 7 or 8 wide if you want to maximise the number of attacks realistically. But Bretonnia really loves this development because their units take up so little space. The lance formation means knights can come into your lines and actually keep a really narrow frontage. And this allows multiple units of knights, possibly characters as well if they're separate and on flying creatures, to all engage with a single unit. I've seen a unit of my own, Knights of the Inner Circle, backed by a General of the Empire. Despite having a unit partially restricting the space that could be taken up for charging, using countercharge to push forward and again restrict the amount of visible space in their front. The Bretonnians were able to put something like 800 points into their face because of these narrow frontages. And quite frankly, my inner circle knights, they just couldn't take that sort of firepower going into them and were utterly ruined. This led to a breakthrough and things then going horribly, horribly wrong. Now, as I say, I used other units to try and block out the charge. I'd used terrain to restrict the angles that my opponent had, and that did restrict the amount of figures he could get into combat with me. But that tight real estate really played into the hands of the Bretonnian player. Any other army would really have struggled to get more than a couple of models into contact, given the angles on the day, but it wasn't to be with the Bretonnians. And that is why I think we're looking at real estate being the super strength of Bretonnia. But all is not lost, because I think as well as being this really powerful strength, it's also actually a fairly significant weakness, particularly turn 1, turn 2 of the game. Because it means that knights are stacked up deep. It means that war machines, if you get some good shots off, can cause absolute havoc. The game I was just talking about against Bretonnia, actually that happened on the second run through of the game. Because turn 1, the knights had dismounted, prayed to the Lady of the Lake, and the Empire artillery had opened up, ploughing red ruin through their ranks, followed by the Outriders blazing away and causing a unit of the Knights of the Realm to flee. So we reset. It was a learning game. We weren't going to have a game if his army had been blasted apart turn 1. But that deployment method, going deep in the lance formation, did leave the Bretonnians vulnerable to cannon fire whipping through the many ranks that they had. So, as I say, all is not lost, but once they're on you, very difficult thing to deal with, and something I think that's really worth bearing in mind. They take up a lot less space than you give them credit for, and that really needs to be mitigated. So what do you think? Do you think the Bretonnians have other super strengths I've simply not come across yet? Is it their Pegasus Knights being able to bounce around from cover to cover like a Harrier jump jet before swiping across your flanks? Is it just the sheer output of power the Grail Knights can produce? The stickiness of men-at-arms, what do you think? Let me know down in the comments below. All that remains for me to say is thank you very much for listening. If you've enjoyed this video and other videos like it, picking up on the lessons learnt from my games of Warhammer the Old World, do consider dropping a like and a subscribe. It's really helpful for a small channel such as this one. Once again, thank you very much for listening. I am returned to the Old World. Have a great day.